Check the ATIS again, Aaron. Captain Derek Hoffman didn't look at his first officer as he gave the command. His gaze was fixed on the distant runway at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, where the Georgia heat was already making the air shimmer like liquid glass. From his left-hand seat in the Bombardier CRJ-900, Hoffman was the undisputed master of this metallic domain, a 76-ton marvel of engineering that responded to his will alone. First Officer Aaron Blake, 31, and perpetually anxious, complied instantly. Still on information, Lima Captain. Winds 220 at 8, visibility 10 miles, sky clear. Fine. Hoffman adjusted the crisp white cuffs of his pilot shirt with practiced precision. Everything about Captain Derek Hoffman was meticulously maintained, from his perfectly combed silver hair to the gleaming black leather of his shoes. Appearance to Hoffman was a non-negotiable extension of authority. A pilot who looked sharp flew sharp. It was a mantra he repeated often, especially to younger co-pilots like Aaron, who he felt belonged to a generation that was altogether too casual about standards. Today's irritation wasn't directed at Aaron specifically, but at the universe in general. A catering truck had been 5 minutes late, a trivial delay that had nonetheless rippled through his carefully constructed schedule. It was an imperfection, a smudge on the otherwise clean window of his command. To Hoffman, an on-time departure was a matter of personal pride, a reflection of his control and efficiency. These ground crews, he muttered more to himself than to Aaron. Moving like they've got all day. No sense of urgency. No professionalism. Aaron offered a non-committal nod. Yes, sir. He knew better than to engage when the captain was in one of his moods. 6 months of flying with Derek Hoffman had taught Aaron the survival rules: agree quickly, comply completely, and stay quiet unless directly asked a question. Hoffman was technically skilled. No one disputed that. 27 years of flying, 19,500 hours logged, certifications in 6 different aircraft types. His knowledge of aviation regulations was encyclopedic. His procedures were textbook perfect. But his ego was as vast and turbulent as a thunderhead building over the Gulf. He referred to the aircraft as my airplane, the crew as my team, and the schedule as my time. When things went according to his plan, he was satisfied. When they didn't, everyone within earshot knew about it. You know what? I can't stand, Aaron Hoffman said suddenly, his tone conversational but carrying an edge that made Aaron tense. Sir, people who don't respect the order of things, the procedures, the hierarchy, the chain of command. Hoffman's fingers drummed on the throttle quadrant. I had a first officer last month, kid maybe 26, who tried to tell me about a weather briefing. Me, like I haven't been reading Metter since before he was born. Aaron shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. That must have been frustrating, Captain. Frustrating. Hoffman's laugh was sharp and humorless. It was disrespectful. That's what's wrong with this industry now. Everyone thinks they deserve a voice. Everyone thinks their opinion matters equally. But up here, he tapped the armrest of his seat. In this left-hand seat, there's only one voice that matters. Mine. The finality in his tone brooked no disagreement. Aaron had heard variations of this speech before. It never ended well for anyone who pushed back against it. And if someone doesn't like it, Hoffman continued, his gaze still on the distant taxiway, they can find another aircraft to fly. Because this is my cockpit, my rules, my command. I've earned this seat through experience, through dedication, through knowing what I'm doing. And I'm not going to let some fresh-faced kid or some bureaucrat with a clipboard tell me otherwise. It was a philosophy that had served Hoffman well for over 2 decades. Or so he believed. He'd built his reputation on being firm, decisive, uncompromising. Other captains might be collaborative or team-oriented, but those were just euphemisms for weak in Hoffman's view. Real command meant strength. Real authority meant being unchallengeable. What Hoffman didn't realize, what he couldn't see from his elevated position in the left seat, was that this philosophy wasn't strength. It was brittleness. And brittle things, when put under enough pressure, don't bend. They shatter. A sharp rap on the cockpit door interrupted his thoughts. Diane Fuller, a veteran flight attendant with tired but observant eyes, leaned in through the doorway. "Captain, the gate agent just called up. We have one more passenger to board. A walk-on." Hoffman's jaw tightened visibly. A walk-on could mean anything. A non-revenue employee, a deadheading pilot, or worse, a complication. "We're 8 minutes from pushback, Diane." "Who is it?" she said. "It's FAA." The two words hit the cockpit like a cold front. Hoffman and Aaron exchanged a glance brief, but loaded with mutual understanding. An FAA inspector. It was uncommon, but not unheard of. They performed random inspections, in-flight audits, verification checks. It was part of the regulatory framework that governed every commercial flight in the United States. It was also, from Hoffman's perspective, a monumental pain in the ass. Great Hoffman said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just what we needed. Another box ticker with a clipboard who's never flown through a real crosswind in their life, ready to tell me how to do my job. Diane's expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. She'd worked with Hoffman long enough to recognize the warning signs when he felt his authority was being challenged. "Tell the agent to send them up," Hoffman said, already unbuckling his harness with a decisive click. "Let's get this over with." "Yes, Captain." Diane withdrew quietly, closing the door with a soft thud. Aaron watched his captain stand and straighten his tie, a subtle, almost subconscious gesture of puffing up his chest, preparing for confrontation. "It's probably just a paperwork check," Aaron offered, trying to smooth the captain's ruffled feathers. "It's always just something with them," Hoffman retorted, his tone sharp. "They exist to find fault to justify their government paychecks. They walk into our world, a world they barely understand, from their little office cubicles, and they look for any reason to write us up." He grabbed his company manual from the side pocket, though he had no intention of consulting it. It was a prop, a symbol of his preparedness. "Watch. It'll be some kid fresh out of training who's never handled turbulence in their life, ready to lecture me about procedures I've been executing perfectly for decades." Aaron said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. Instead, he focused on his instruments, on the pre-flight checklist items still pending, on anything that wasn't the growing tension radiating from the left seat. Hoffman stepped through the cockpit door and into the narrow galley, his polished shoes clicking authoritatively on the aircraft floor. He carried with him an aura of absolute, unassailable authority. He was Captain Derek Hoffman, pilot in command of Summit Air Flight 5821. This was his domain, his kingdom, his world. No one, especially not some low-level government functionary, was going to disrupt the perfect order of his flight. As he walked down the jet bridge, adjusting his tie one final time, he was already composing the dismissive but professional greeting he'd give this inspector. Polite enough to avoid a complaint, but firm enough to establish who was in charge. He was expecting a man, probably middle-aged, slightly overweight, wearing a cheap suit, and carrying a world-weary expression born of bureaucratic tedium. What he saw instead would change his life forever, and not in the way he expected. Captain Derek Hoffman stepped onto the jet bridge and stopped. The woman standing before him was perhaps 5'5", wearing a simple navy blue pantsuit that was professional but not expensive-looking. She held a black leather briefcase in one hand and a laminated federal ID card in the other. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression was calm, patient, and entirely composed. For a split second, just a flicker of thought, Hoffman's brain processed black woman. Casual business attire. Calm demeanor. Young, maybe late 30s. And in that split second, his assumptions did their work. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his tone polite but firm, the kind of voice one might use with someone who'd accidentally wandered into a restricted area. This is a restricted zone. Passengers need to remain in the gate area until boarding is announced. Dr. Elise Monroe didn't move. She didn't flinch or bristle. She simply raised the ID card higher so it was directly in his line of sight. "Captain Hoffman," she said, her voice professional and measured, carrying neither warmth nor coldness. "I'm Dr. Elise Monroe, Federal Aviation Administration Southern Regional Office. I'm here to conduct an in-flight cockpit observation under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 121.543. I'll need access to the forward jump seat." Hoffman's eyes flicked to the ID card. He didn't really look at it, didn't examine the holographic seal, the embedded security features, the official formatting. He just noted that it existed and that she was holding it. "Right," he said in the tone one might use with a door-to-door salesman. Professional but dismissive. "I appreciate that, but we've had issues before with people impersonating officials. I'm sure you understand I need to verify your credentials properly before I can allow access to my aircraft." It was a reasonable-sounding statement. It checked all the boxes of due diligence. It was also completely disingenuous, and Dr. Elise Monroe knew it immediately. She'd played this game before. "Of course, Captain," she replied evenly, her voice still calm. "The identification card has a holographic seal issued by the Department of Transportation, an embedded security chip traceable through federal databases, and my inspector number Echo Mike 6471. You can verify through your company's FAA liaison office. The contact number is printed on the back page of your operations manual under Section 4 Federal Coordination Protocols." She recited this without checking notes, without hesitation, without any indication that she was reading from memory. It was simply information she knew delivered with the casual authority of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Hoffman's jaw tightened slightly. Something about her calm certainty irritated him. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't deferential. She was just stating facts as if they were self-evident and unchallengeable. "I'll need to call operations," he said, crossing his arms over his chest, a subtle but clear defensive posture. "That's fine, Captain. I'll wait." But Hoffman didn't reach for his phone. Instead, he remained where he was, arms crossed, creating an invisible barrier between himself and the jet bridge entrance. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge, "we're already running 10 minutes behind schedule. This is really inconvenient timing for an unannounced inspection. Federal aviation inspections aren't scheduled for convenience." Captain Dr. Monroe replied, her tone still perfectly neutral. "That's intentional. It ensures we observe normal operations rather than specially prepared procedures." "Right." Hoffman's expression hardened another degree. "But maybe you could come back tomorrow. We could schedule something, properly coordinate with dispatch, make sure everything's organized." "No, Captain." The word was simple, direct, non-negotiable. "The inspection is happening today on this flight under normal operational conditions. That's how the regulation works." There was something about the way she said it, not aggressive, not demanding, just matter of fact, that made Hoffman's irritation spike into something closer to anger. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't acknowledging his authority. She was just standing there, calm as glass, as if his commands meant nothing. "Look," he said, and his voice had shifted now from polite to condescending. "Miss Doctor," she corrected quietly. "Dr. Carter." "Monroe." Hoffman's face flushed slightly. "Dr. Monroe. I don't know how things work at your office, but on my aircraft I'm the pilot in command. I decide who boards and who doesn't. And right now I'm deciding that we need to verify your credentials properly before we proceed." Dr. Monroe's expression didn't change. Not a flicker of anger, not a hint of frustration. Just steady professional composure. "Then verify them, Captain. I'll wait right here while you make the call." But Hoffman still didn't move toward his phone. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes challenging. Behind them, passengers in the gate area were beginning to notice the confrontation. A young woman with a laptop looked up from her screen, frowning slightly. A man in business attire glanced over, then returned to his phone. A few others were starting to pay attention, sensing tension in the air like animals sensing a storm. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Aaron Blake stood in the doorway, watching through the small gap. His stomach was beginning to knot with a feeling he couldn't quite name, but recognized instinctively as dread. "This isn't going to end well," he thought. And he was right. Captain Dr. Elise Monroe said, her voice still measured but carrying a new weight. "I've presented valid federal credentials. I've cited the specific regulation authorizing my presence on this aircraft. If you have doubts about the authenticity of my identification, you have multiple channels available to verify: your FAA liaison office, your chief pilot, your operations center, even the direct line to the Southern Regional Office printed on my credential card." She paused, letting that sink in. But refusing to even attempt verification suggests this isn't actually about security concerns. Hoffman bristled visibly. "Are you accusing me of—" "I'm stating facts," Dr. Monroe interrupted calmly. "You haven't examined my credentials closely. You haven't called your operations center. You haven't consulted your manual. You've simply decided I'm not boarding this aircraft." A throat cleared nearby. Both Hoffman and Monroe turned to see a young Hispanic woman in her late 20s approaching from the gate seating area. She held her phone in her hand, and the red recording light was clearly visible. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice clear and professional. "I'm Elena Reyes, and I'm a passenger on this flight. Is there a safety issue we should know about?" Hoffman's head snapped toward her, his expression darkening. "This doesn't concern you, miss." "Actually, it does concern me," Elena replied, her journalism training evident in her calm but direct manner. "If there's a security issue preventing our departure, all passengers have a right to know about it." "There's no security issue," Hoffman said sharply. "This is a procedural matter between me and this person claiming to be an FAA inspector." "I'm not claiming anything," Captain Dr. Monroe said quietly. "I am an FAA inspector. Inspector identification: Echo Mike 6471, Southern Regional Office, certified and authorized under federal aviation regulations." Elena's fingers moved over her phone screen. Her live stream was already active, though only a handful of her 45,000 Twitter followers were watching yet. She typed quickly, "At ATL Gate B27. Summit Air Pilot refusing to let what appears to be an FAA inspector board. Recording this, something feels very wrong." Within 30 seconds, 3 people retweeted it. Within 2 minutes, an aviation enthusiast account with 50,000 followers had shared it with commentary. "If this is real, this pilot just ended his career." Another voice joined the growing scene. A man in his late 30s wearing dark jeans and a Delta Airlines polo shirt with an ID badge hanging from his neck stood up from his seat near the gate desk. "Captain Hoffman," he called out, his voice carrying professional courtesy but also unmistakable concern. "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but I couldn't help overhearing. Is that an FAA inspector?" Hoffman turned, irritation flashing in his eyes at yet another interruption. "And you are Captain Luis Mendoza, Delta Airlines." He gestured to his ID badge. "I'm deadheading home to Tulsa. Sir, if that inspector has cited Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 121.43, that's the Federal Aviation Regulation governing inspector access to aircraft and flight deck. It's mandatory compliance, not optional." Hoffman's face was reddening now, the flush creeping up from his collar. "I don't need another pilot telling me how to run my operation." "I'm not telling you how to run your operation," Captain Luis said, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm reminding you of federal law. When an FAA inspector presents proper credentials and invokes that regulation, we cooperate. It's not a request or a negotiation. It's a legal requirement that supersedes captain's authority." Luis turned slightly to address the growing crowd of onlookers. For everyone wondering what's happening when a federal aviation inspector conducts an inspection, it's part of how we keep flying safe. They check that airlines and pilots are following procedures properly. Refusing an inspector is like... He paused, searching for an analogy, like refusing to let a health inspector into a restaurant kitchen. It's not just rude, it's a violation of the operating certificate. Elena was recording everything her phone steady. Her live stream viewers had jumped to 412. The comments were starting to flood in. "Is this captain serious? He's going to lose his license. Someone needs to stop this. Where's airport security?" From near the windows, a new figure rolled forward in a wheelchair. Colonel James Whitfield. 61, retired Air Force after 28 years of service, his posture still military straight despite the chair. His face carried the weathered dignity of someone who'd commanded fighter wings and seen real authority in action. "Young man," he addressed Hoffman, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that comes from decades of military service. "I've seen a lot of federal identification cards in my career. Air Force, DoD, DHS, TSA, FAA. Those credentials she's holding look legitimate to me." Hoffman barely glanced at him. "Are you a commercial airline pilot?" "I was a pilot. F-16s. 28 years flying, 12 years commanding squadrons." "Then you should understand chain of command," Hoffman shot back. Colonel Whitfield's expression hardened, though his voice remained level. "I also understand, Honor Captain. And what you're doing right now. This isn't command. This is fear dressed up as authority." The words hung in the air like an indictment. The gate area had gone notably quieter. Passengers who'd been scrolling through their phones or reading books were now watching openly. Some had their phones raised recording. Others were whispering to their traveling companions, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Brenda Holloway, the gate agent, a Hispanic woman in her early 30s with Summit Air for 6 years, appeared at Hoffman's elbow. Her face was pale, her hands clutching a printed sheet. "Captain Hoffman," she said quietly, urgently. "Sir, I pulled up Dr. Monroe's credentials in our FAA liaison database." Hoffman's eyes snapped to her. "What her identification checks out. She's verified in the system." As Brenda glanced down at the printout, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "She's verified as lead Aviation Safety Inspector, Southern Regional Office. She's senior level. She oversees..." "I don't care what the system says." Hoffman's voice rose sharply, cutting her off. The words echoed across the gate area, and in that moment every witness present understood exactly what this was really about. Not security, not verification, not procedures. Something else entirely. Dr. Elise Monroe stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged, but her next words carried the weight of 16 years of experience dealing with men exactly like Derek Hoffman. "Captain," she said quietly, but her voice somehow carried to every corner of the gate area. "Everyone here is watching you make a choice right now. You can examine my credentials properly, call your chief pilot, verify through official channels, and then allow me to board as federal law requires. That's one choice." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Or you can continue to refuse, which will trigger an immediate federal investigation into both you personally and Summit Air's entire operation. That's your other choice." Another pause heavier than the first. "What you cannot do, what no one here believes you're actually doing, is claiming this is about security or procedures, because everyone in this terminal knows it isn't." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena's live stream had 637 viewers now. Luis Mendoza had his phone out, ready to call his union representative if this went where he thought it was going. Colonel Whitfield was shaking his head slowly, sadly, like a teacher watching a student fail a test they should have easily passed. Brenda stood frozen, the printout trembling slightly in her hands, torn between her duty to her captain and what she knew was right. And First Officer Aaron Blake, still standing in the cockpit doorway 20 feet away, felt his stomach twist with the sick certainty that he was about to witness something terrible. Hoffman looked around at the assembled faces, the passengers, the witnesses, the phones held up like mirrors reflecting his judgment back at him. And in that moment, with his authority challenged his control, slipping and his ego screaming that he could not, would not back down to this woman, he made his choice. "I don't care what badge you're waving," he said, his voice loud and final. "You're not boarding my aircraft." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples that would soon become waves. Elena's live stream exploded with comments. Luis Mendoza closed his eyes briefly, thinking he just ended his career. Colonel Whitfield murmured, "Poor bastard has no idea what he just did." And Dr. Elise Monroe, who had given him every chance to step back from the edge, nodded once. "Then we're done here, Captain," she said quietly. "You've made your choice." She pulled out her phone, and everything changed. Dr. Elise Monroe's thumb moved across her phone screen with practiced precision. She didn't dial frantically. She didn't hesitate. She simply executed a procedure she'd performed before, though never with quite this many witnesses. "This is Dr. Elise Monroe," she said into the phone, her voice clear and carrying across the jet bridge and into the gate area beyond. "Inspector identification, Echo Mike, 6471, Federal Aviation Administration, Southern Regional Office, Atlanta." Captain Hoffman opened his mouth to interrupt, but Monroe held up one finger. "Wait," and something in the gesture's quiet authority made him pause. "I'm standing on Jet Bridge Bravo 27 at Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. I've presented federal credentials to Captain Derek Hoffman, ATP certificate number 3472891, and verbally invoked my authority under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 121.543, to conduct an unannounced in-flight cockpit observation of Summit Air Flight 5821. First Officer Aaron Blake, still watching from the cockpit doorway, felt the blood drain from his face. She knows his certificate number. She recited it from memory. She's not bluffing. She's not some random person with a fake badge. This is real. Captain Hoffman has refused boarding 3 separate times. Dr. Monroe continued, her voice maintaining its professional, almost clinical tone. Despite proper federal identification, despite regulatory citation, and despite database verification from the gate agent confirming my credentials are legitimate and current. On the other end of the line, Regional Administrator Thomas Bradford's voice came through calm but edged with steel. Confirmed, Dr. Monroe. I'm logging this incident now, Code Bravo 7 Inspector Obstruction, pulling Captain Hoffman's certificate history and Summit Air's compliance records. Do you need airport security or local law enforcement? Not yet, Monroe replied. But I want everything documented, time-stamped, every refusal, every witness statement, already logging it real time. And Elise Bradford's voice softened fractionally. I'm sorry you're dealing with this again. It's the job, she replied simply. Then, louder, addressing not just Bradford, but everyone within earshot. My supervisor is documenting this incident in real time. Everything being said and done here is now part of an official federal record. This is no longer a gate dispute. This is a federal investigation. Elena Reyes's live stream comment section was moving too fast to read federal investigation. This captain is done. She's got his certificate number memorized. Someone please tell him to stop talking. This is career suicide in 4K. The viewer count hit 843. Luis Mendoza leaned toward the passenger next to him and whispered, That phone call isn't a threat. It's documentation. Everything he says from this point forward is evidence. Hoffman's face had gone from red to an unhealthy shade of purple-white. You think you can threaten me with some phone call I've been flying for 27 years? I have nearly 20,000 hours. You don't just walk onto my aircraft and... Captain Hoffman. Dr. Monroe's voice cut through his bluster like a scalpel through tissue. Not loud, not emotional, just absolute. The gate area fell silent. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. She took one step closer to him, close enough that the other passengers couldn't hear if she whispered. But she didn't whisper. She wanted everyone to hear this. I am not a threat. I am not an inconvenience. I am not someone you can dismiss, because I don't match whatever image you had in your head of what an FAA inspector should look like. Another step. I am a federal aviation safety inspector with authority granted by the United States Congress. When I present these credentials, she held up her ID again. I am not asking for permission. I am notifying you of a legal requirement. Do you understand the difference? Hoffman said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. I have a PhD in aeronautical engineering from the California Institute of Technology. Monroe continued, her voice never rising, but the intensity growing with each word. I spent 6 years at Boeing designing the flight management systems you use every time you program a flight plan into that computer in your cockpit. I've conducted 437 in-flight observations. I've investigated 19 major aviation incidents. I've read cockpit voice recordings from crashes where captains like you prioritized their ego over the safety of everyone on board. She was close enough now that Hoffman had to look slightly down to meet her eyes, and what he saw there was not anger or vindictiveness. It was something far more powerful. It was the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they represented. I wrote the 2021 revision to Crew Resource Management Protocols, Dr. Monroe said. The protocols you're required to be trained on every year. My research on authority gradients in cockpit communication has been published in the Journal of Aviation Safety and Human Factors. I've testified before the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure about aviation safety culture. A pause. I am the lead aviation safety inspector for the FAA's Southern Regional Office. I oversee all commercial air carrier inspections for Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, and South Carolina. I've been doing this job for 16 years. She let each fact land like a hammer blow. So when you looked at me and decided in less than 30 seconds that I didn't belong on your aircraft, you weren't making a security assessment. You weren't following procedures. You were making a judgment based on assumptions that had nothing to do with my credentials, my experience, my authority, or my expertise. The final step brought her close enough that she could speak in a near whisper, but the gate area was so quiet that every word carried. And everyone here knows exactly what those assumptions were based on. Elena's live stream had passed 1,000 viewers. The comments were a waterfall. She wrote the regulations PhD from Caltech. Oh my God. He refused the person who designs the systems he uses. This is the most deserved takedown I've ever seen. I'm literally crying. This is beautiful. Luis Mendoza turned to Colonel Whitfield, his voice barely audible. Holy shit. That's the Dr. Monroe. She's a legend in aviation safety circles. She literally wrote the textbook on crew resource management. He just refused one of the most respected safety experts in the country. Colonel Whitfield nodded slowly, his expression sad. He saw a black woman in a plain suit, and his brain couldn't process that she might have authority over him. Couldn't see past the surface to the expertise underneath. Tale as old as time, son. Tale as old as time. Brenda Holloway. The gate agent had pulled up Dr. Monroe's full profile on her computer. Publications, certifications, awards, commendations from 3 FAA administrators, letters of appreciation from airline CEOs, safety improvements attributed to her investigations. This woman wasn't just qualified, she was extraordinarily accomplished in her field. And Captain Hoffman had dismissed her without even properly looking at her credentials. Brenda felt tears pricking at her eyes. She'd worked in aviation for 6 years and had faced her own share of being underestimated, talked over, or ignored. Watching Dr. Monroe stand there calm and professional and absolutely unshakable was like watching a master class in quiet strength. Captain Mitchell on the line. Bradford's voice came through Monroe's phone. Summit's chief pilot. Want me to conference her in? Yes, Monroe said clearly. A new voice joined the call, deeper, older, weighted with command authority and what sounded like deep concern. This is Captain Diane Mitchell, chief pilot for Summit Air. Dr. Monroe. I've been briefed on the situation. On behalf of Summit Air, I want to apologize for... Captain Mitchell, Doctor. Monroe interrupted. I need you to understand exactly what's happening here. Captain Hoffman has not only refused a federal inspection, he's done so in front of multiple witnesses, including passengers, a commercial pilot from another carrier, and a gate agent who verified my credentials in your own FAA liaison database. I understand that, Dr. Monroe. He was given 3 separate opportunities to verify my identity through proper channels. He refused all of them. This isn't a misunderstanding or a communication breakdown. This is willful obstruction of federal aviation safety oversight. There was a brief pause. Then, Captain Hoffman, are you on this call? Can you hear me? Hoffman finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than before. Yes, ma'am. Did you refuse Dr. Monroe boarding after she presented federal credentials? Silence, Captain Hoffman. Answer the question. She didn't. She wasn't. Hoffman's voice cracked. I was just trying to verify properly. We've had security concerns and... Did the gate agent confirm her credentials in our FAA liaison system? Yes, but... Then explain to me, Captain, why you didn't board her after confirmation. The question hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Hoffman looked around desperately at the passengers watching with phones raised at Elena, still live-streaming at Luis Mendoza's disappointed expression, at Colonel Whitfield's sad shake of his head, at Brenda clutching her printout with tears in her eyes, at Aaron Blake standing pale and horrified in the cockpit doorway. I made a judgment call, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, based on what Captain Mitchell asked, and Derek Hoffman couldn't answer. Because the real answer, the honest answer, was something he couldn't say out loud, not with everyone listening, not with this being recorded, not with his whole career hanging in the balance. Dr. Elise Monroe said it for him. Captain Mitchell, I've been in this situation 6 times in my 16-year career. 6 times I've presented credentials to pilots who couldn't see past their own biases about who belongs in positions of authority. 5 of those times the pilot recognized their mistake quickly, and we moved forward professionally. She looked directly at Hoffman. This is the first time a pilot has maintained his refusal even after verification, even after regulatory citation, even after I've clearly established federal authority. This isn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This is a fundamental failure of character and compliance disposition. The technical language couldn't hide what everyone understood. Captain Derek Hoffman had looked at Dr. Elise Monroe and decided, based on how she looked, not who she was, that she didn't deserve respect or authority. And now that decision was going to cost him everything. Dr. Elise Monroe ended the call with Captain Mitchell, but kept her phone in her hand. She looked at Captain Derek Hoffman for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted not to anger or triumph, but to something that looked almost like regret. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but somehow that made it more powerful. Captain Hoffman, I'm going to offer you something I've offered exactly 3 times in my 16 years as an inspector. The entire gate area went silent. Even the ambient airport noise, the rolling of luggage, the gate announcements, the distant engine roar seemed to fade into nothing. Everyone was listening. I'm going to give you the opportunity to restart this conversation, Monroe said. We're going to pretend the last 15 minutes didn't happen. You're going to look at my credentials, really look at them properly, examine them. You're going to call your operations center and verify my identity through official channels. You're going to consult your manual. And then once you've confirmed everything is legitimate, you're going to invite me aboard to conduct my inspection as federal law requires. She held up one finger. But this is the only time I'm offering this. If you refuse again, everything that happens after this moment becomes permanent. Your career, your reputation, your license, all of it will be subject to a federal enforcement review that will examine not just today's actions, but your entire record. Every complaint that's ever been filed against you. Every time you've bent or broken regulations. Every instance where someone questioned your judgment and you dismissed them. Her eyes locked with his. Do you want to be remembered as the pilot who had a bad moment, recognized it, and corrected course? Or do you want to be the cautionary tale they teach about in every aviation safety class for the next 20 years? The captain whose ego was more important than federal law. The weight of the choice hung in the air like storm clouds. Elena Reyes's live stream had 1,300 viewers now, and her chat was moving so fast the messages blurred. She's giving him an out. Take it. Take it. Take it. If he refuses this, he's the dumbest person alive. This is his last chance. Luis Mendoza leaned forward in his seat, every muscle tense. He'd seen enough in aviation to know that good people made mistakes, and he desperately wanted to believe that Hoffman would take this opportunity, would step back from the edge. Colonel Whitfield clasped his hands together almost as if praying. He'd seen young officers make similar mistakes, letting pride override sense, and he knew how those stories ended. Some learned, some didn't. Brenda held her breath. Aaron Blake in the cockpit doorway thought, "Please, Captain. Please just take the offer. Please." And for one flickering moment, just a heartbeat, something crossed Derek Hoffman's face. Doubt. Fear. The dim awareness that he was standing at a precipice and one more step would send him into freefall. His mouth opened. He looked at Dr. Monroe's credentials still held in her steady hand. He looked at the crowd of witnesses. He looked at his first officer's horrified expression. He looked at the phone in Monroe's hand, still connected to his supervisor, still documenting everything. He could end this. Right now, he could say, "You're right. Let me verify your credentials properly." He could call operations. He could follow procedure. He could admit he'd made assumptions and apologize and move forward as a better pilot for having learned this lesson. The redemption arc was right there laid out before him like a runway on a clear day. All he had to do was take it. But then his jaw set, his shoulders squared, and the moment of doubt vanished, burned away by something older and more powerful than reason pride. "I am the pilot in command of this aircraft," he said, and his voice was loud, certain final, the voice of a man who'd convinced himself he was right, even as the ground crumbled beneath him. "I have sole authority over who boards and who doesn't, and I don't negotiate with people who don't respect my position." The air left the room. Elena's live stream chat exploded. He said, "No, is he insane? He just threw away his entire career. I can't believe what I'm watching. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen." Luis Mendoza put his head in his hands. "Oh my God." Colonel Whitfield closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. Poor fool just stepped off the cliff. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Aaron Blake felt his knees weaken. He grabbed the cockpit doorframe for support. No. 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 And Dr. Elise Monroe, who had given him every chance, who had offered him a way out, who had tried to save him from himself, simply nodded once. "Then we're done here, Captain." Her voice was calm, but the finality in it was absolute. "Not because I'm giving up, but because you just made a choice that can't be unmade." She raised her phone back to her ear. This is Dr. Monroe. Invoke emergency enforcement protocols. Subject Captain Derek Hoffman, certificate number 3472891. Charge willful obstruction of federal safety inspection. Status uncooperative and demonstrating unsafe judgment. Hoffman's face went from red to white in the space of a single heartbeat. Confirmed Bradford's voice came through clearly enough for nearby passengers to hear. I'm pulling his full certificate history and initiating a comprehensive audit of all Summit Air operations at this station. And Elise will need to interview every witness. This is going formal. Monroe's voice stayed level. I'll be filing my complete report within the hour. And yes, audit every flight he's commanded in the last 12 months. If his judgment is this compromised on the ground with witnesses present, I want to know what happened when no one was watching. She ended the call and looked at Hoffman one final time. You wanted authority, Captain, she said quietly. You just got all the authority you can handle. The words landed like a verdict, because everyone there knew Captain Derek Hoffman's career was over. He just hadn't fully realized it yet. Dr. Elise Monroe didn't move from her position on the jet bridge. She stood perfectly still, phone in hand, and turned to address not just Captain Hoffman, but everyone watching the passengers in the gate area, the growing crowd of curious travelers, Elena's live stream audience, and most importantly, the man whose career she was about to end. Captain Hoffman looked at me and made a decision. In less than 30 seconds, she said, her voice clear and carrying. He didn't examine my credentials properly. He didn't consult his operations manual. He didn't call his chief pilot. He didn't verify through any of the multiple official channels available to him. She held up her ID card, turning it so the crowd could see it. He just decided. And everyone here needs to understand what that decision was actually based on. She took a step toward Hoffman, who stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion and growing dread. So let me tell you who I actually am, Captain. Let me tell you who you just refused. A beat of silence. My name is Dr. Elise Monroe. I graduated from the California Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering, summa cum laude. I completed my doctorate in aeronautical engineering at the same institution with a dissertation on human factors in aviation accidents, specifically how cockpit authority gradients contribute to preventable crashes. Hoffman tried to speak. That doesn't, but she didn't let him interrupt. I spent 6 years working for Boeing Commercial Airplanes as a senior flight systems engineer. I was part of the team that designed the electronic flight bag systems and flight management computer interfaces that are in the cockpit of nearly every modern commercial aircraft, including the one you flew today. She gestured toward the aircraft behind him. I joined the Federal Aviation Administration 16 years ago. I've conducted 437 in-flight cockpit observations. I've investigated 19 major aviation incidents, including 3 fatal crashes. I've read cockpit voice recordings from accidents where captains prioritized their ego over basic safety protocols, where they ignored input from first officers, where they created an environment so toxic that crew members were afraid to speak up even when they knew something was catastrophically wrong. Her voice never rose, but the intensity built with each sentence. I wrote the 2021 Comprehensive Revision to FAA Advisory Circular 12051E on Crew Resource Management. That's the document that governs how captains like you are supposed to interact with your crew, how you're supposed to accept input, how you're supposed to create a safety culture in your cockpit. The training you're required to complete every year, I wrote significant portions of the curriculum. Elena's live stream had nearly 2,000 viewers now. The comments were a blur of shock and vindication. She wrote the regulations PhD from Caltech. He refused the person who designs the systems he uses. This is the most epic takedown I've ever seen. My research on authority-based decision-making failures has been published in the Journal of Aviation Safety, the International Journal of Aerospace Psychology, and the proceedings of 3 different international safety conferences. Monroe continued. I've been cited in over 40 peer-reviewed papers on human factors in aviation. She was close enough now that Hoffman had to look at her directly, couldn't avoid her gaze. I've testified before the United States House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Twice. On the subject of aviation safety culture and regulatory oversight. Members of Congress have asked for my expert opinion on how to prevent accidents, how to improve training, how to identify and address problematic patterns before they kill people. Another step closer. I am the lead Aviation Safety Inspector for the FAA's Southern Regional Office. Do you know what that means, Captain? It means I oversee all commercial air carrier safety inspections for 6 states. It means when there's an incident in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, or South Carolina, I'm one of the people who investigates it. It means airlines in this region know my name because I've sat in their offices and explained what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. She held up her phone where Bradford was still on the line, still listening, still documenting. It means that when I call my supervisor and invoke emergency enforcement protocols, people listen. Because I have 16 years of credibility, 16 years of being right, 16 years of making aviation safer. Now she was close enough that only Hoffman could hear her next words clearly, but she didn't whisper. She wanted everyone to hear. So when you looked at me, Captain, and decided in less than 30 seconds that I didn't belong on your aircraft, you weren't making a security decision. You weren't following procedures. You were making a judgment based on something that had nothing to do with my credentials, my education, my experience, my accomplishments, or my authority. She let that sink in for 3 full seconds, and every single person here knows exactly what that judgment was based on. The silence that followed was deafening. Luis Mendoza turned to the passenger beside him, his voice shaking slightly. That's the Dr. Elise Monroe. She's not just an FAA inspector. She's one of the most respected safety experts in American aviation. Her research is taught at every major flight school in the country. When she speaks at conferences, the room is packed. Airlines actually want her doing inspections because they trust her expertise. He looked back at Hoffman and his expression was pure dismay, and he refused her without even looking at her credentials. Colonel Whitfield's military bearing couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes. He saw a black woman in a plain suit, and his brain couldn't process that she might be one of the most qualified people in her field. Couldn't see past his assumptions to the truth standing right in front of him. Brenda Holloway had pulled up Dr. Monroe's complete professional profile on her terminal. Academic achievements, publications, patents on aviation safety systems, awards from 4 different FAA administrators, letters of commendation from airline CEOs thanking her for catching safety issues before they became accidents, guest lectures at MIT, Georgia Tech, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. This woman wasn't just qualified, she was extraordinary, and Captain Derek Hoffman, with all his 27 years and 19,000 hours, had dismissed her in 30 seconds based on nothing but his prejudices. Brenda felt tears running down her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. Aaron Blake, still in the cockpit doorway, had slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the bulkhead head in his hands. He'd just watched his captain commit professional suicide, and he'd said nothing, done nothing. He would have to live with that silence for the rest of his career. And Captain Derek Hoffman stood there, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done, watching his entire life crumble in real time. Captain Mitchell on the line. Bradford's voice came through Monroe's phone. Summit Air Chief Pilot. She's heard everything. She wants to speak directly to Captain Hoffman. Monroe held the phone out toward Hoffman. You might want to take this call, Captain, she said quietly. And in the moment he reached for that phone, Derek Hoffman finally understood his career was over, and he had no one to blame but himself. Captain Diane Mitchell's voice came through Dr. Monroe's phone with the kind of clarity that suggested she'd been listening to every word of the exchange. When she spoke, her tone carried the weight of command authority mixed with barely suppressed fury and deep disappointment. This is Captain Mitchell, Chief Pilot, Summit Air, Dr. Monroe. I want to state clearly and for the record that Summit Air takes federal oversight seriously. We cooperate fully with FAA inspections. What has occurred today does not reflect our company's values or protocols." She paused, and the pause had weight. "Captain Hoffman, are you still on this call?" Hoffman's voice came out hoarse. "Yes, ma'am." "Did you refuse Dr. Monroe boarding after she presented federal credentials?" A long silence. Then, barely audible, I did. "Did Gate Agent Holloway confirm Dr. Monroe's credentials through our FAA liaison database?" "Yes, but I—" "Answer yes or no, Captain." "Yes." "Did Captain Mendoza from Delta Airlines remind you that Title 14 CFR 121, 543 mandates Inspector access?" "Yes." "Then explain to me, Captain Hoffman, why you continued to refuse boarding." The question hung in the air like an accusation and an invitation. Everyone listening knew there was no good answer. The only honest answer was the one Hoffman couldn't say out loud. I made a judgment call he finally managed, based on what Mitchell's voice was steel wrapped in ice. Silence. "Captain Hoffman, I'm asking you directly. What specific security concern or procedural violation caused you to refuse a verified federal inspector access to the aircraft?" More silence. Hoffman's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Dr. Monroe spoke into the void. "He can't answer that question, Captain Mitchell, because there was no security concern and no procedural violation. There was only a judgment based on assumptions that had nothing to do with my credentials or authority." "I understand that, Dr. Monroe." Mitchell's voice softened fractionally when addressing the inspector, then hardened again. "Captain Hoffman, you're removed from flight status effective immediately. Ground yourself and report to the operations office. Airport security will escort you." "But that is not a request, Captain. That's an order. You will not fly today. You will not fly tomorrow. You will not fly until this investigation is complete and the FAA makes a determination about your certificate. Do you understand?" Hoffman's voice cracked. "Yes, ma'am." First Officer Blake Mitchell continued. "Are you monitoring this?" Aaron's voice came from the cockpit. Shaky. "Yes, ma'am. You'll remain with the aircraft. We're calling in a relief captain to fly this leg. You'll brief them when they arrive, and you'll also be interviewed as a witness to this incident." "Clear." "Yes, Captain." Dr. Monroe Mitchell's tone shifted again, becoming almost gentle. "I apologize that you had to experience this. Summit Air will cooperate fully with your investigation. If you need anything, witness statements, records, documentation, you have my personal commitment that it will be provided immediately." "Thank you, Captain Mitchell." Monroe replied professionally. "I'll be filing my complete report, and I'll need to interview First Officer Blake Gate Agent Holloway and any other Summit employees who witnessed the interaction. Whatever you need." 2 uniformed Atlanta airport police officers appeared at the entrance to the jet bridge. They weren't rushing, weren't being aggressive. This clearly wasn't an arrest situation, but their presence was unmistakable. "Officers," Monroe addressed them calmly. "Captain Hoffman needs to be escorted to the Summit Air Operations Office. He's not under arrest, but he's been removed from flight status and needs to be separated from the aircraft and crew." The older of the 2 officers, a veteran with kind eyes who'd probably seen every kind of airport drama imaginable, nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Captain, if you'll come with us, please." Hoffman looked around one last time at the passengers watching in stunned silence at Elena still recording at Luis Mendoza, shaking his head in dismay at Colonel Whitfield's disappointed expression at Brenda Holloway crying quietly at her station at Aaron Blake sitting on the cockpit floor with his head in his hands. "This isn't fair," Hoffman said quietly, the words sounding hollow even as he spoke them. "I was just trying to—" "Captain." Monroe's voice stopped him cold. You were given 4 separate opportunities to verify my identity through proper channels. You refused all of them. You were offered one final chance to course correct. You refused that too. Every single choice that led to this moment was yours. The consequences are also yours. As the officers gently guided Hoffman away from the jet bridge, something happened that Hoffman would replay in his mind thousands of times in the months to come. The passengers began to applaud. It started with Colonel Whitfield, who brought his hands together slowly, deliberately, each clap distinct and purposeful. Then Elena joined in. Then Luis. Then Victoria Hayes, the corporate VP who'd been watching from her seat. Then Jordan Taylor, the young software engineer. Then William Foster and his wife. Then more passengers, and more until the entire gate area was applauding. They weren't celebrating Hoffman's downfall, though some might have been. Most were applauding Dr. Monroe for her professionalism, for her composure, for standing her ground, for representing accountability in action. Monroe didn't smile, didn't bow or wave or acknowledge the applause in any theatrical way. She simply nodded once, a small gesture of recognition. "Thank you," she said quietly, though only those nearest could hear. "But this isn't a victory. This is just the system working the way it should have from the beginning." She turned to face the passengers who would have been on Flight 5821. "I apologize for the delay to your travel plans. Summit Air is arranging a relief captain and you'll be rebooked on the next available flight. I understand this is frustrating, but I want you to know the next captain who flies this aircraft will be someone who understands that their authority comes with responsibilities, not just privileges." An older woman in the front row spoke up. "We understand, honey, and thank you for doing what you do. My son is a pilot, and I'm grateful people like you are keeping him honest." Monroe's expression softened briefly. "That's why we do this job, ma'am. To keep everyone safe." Elena lowered her phone, her hands shaking slightly despite her journalism training. "Dr. Monroe, I'm Elena Reyes. I live-streamed what happened. It's been viewed by over 2,000 people. Are you okay with that?" Monroe looked at her thoughtfully. "Are you asking if you should delete it?" "I'm asking if I did the right thing." "Yes," Monroe said simply. "Accountability requires witnesses. What you documented might prevent another captain from making the same mistake. That's important." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." Luis Mendoza approached next, extending his hand. "Dr. Monroe." "Captain Luis Mendoza, Delta. I just want to say I've heard you speak at ALPA safety conferences. Your work on CRM has literally saved lives. What happened here today was shameful, and I'm sorry you had to experience it." They shook hands. "Thank you, Captain. And thank you for speaking up. Your professional credibility helped establish the facts for everyone watching. It was the least I could do." Colonel Whitfield rolled forward in his wheelchair. "Ma'am, I'm Colonel James Whitfield, retired Air Force. 28 years of service. I've commanded fighter wings and flight operations. What you demonstrated today was textbook leadership, calm under pressure, clear communication, giving your opponent every chance to de-escalate. You're a credit to federal service." Monroe's professional composure cracked just slightly, and she blinked rapidly. "Thank you, Colonel. That means a great deal coming from someone with your experience. You earned it." Brenda Holloway approached hesitantly, her face blotchy from crying. "Dr. Monroe, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up earlier. I verified your credentials right away, but I was afraid to contradict the captain in front of everyone and—" "Ms. Holloway." Monroe's voice was gentle. "You did speak up. You told Captain Hoffman my credentials were verified. You provided accurate information from the database. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Don't carry guilt for his choices. But I could have—" "You did enough, and your verification was part of the record that shows this wasn't about unclear information. It was about someone refusing to accept information that contradicted what he'd already decided. That's on him, not you. Brenda nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. Finally, Aaron Blake emerged from the cockpit, his face pale, his movements shaky. He approached Dr. Monroe like a condemned man approaching judgment. Dr. Monroe. I'm First Officer Aaron Blake. I was in the cockpit during the entire interaction. I heard everything. And I didn't speak up. I didn't tell Captain Hoffman he was wrong. I didn't advocate for you. I just stood there. His voice broke slightly. I'm so sorry. You deserved better than my silence. Monroe studied him for a long moment. First Officer Blake, do you know why I'll need to interview you as a witness? Because I saw what happened? Partly. But also because you represent something important. You represent every crew member who's ever been too intimidated to speak up when they knew something was wrong. Every first officer who stayed silent while a captain made a dangerous decision. Every person in aviation who chose career safety over doing the right thing. She paused. The fact that you're standing here acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility for your silence, that matters. That's the first step toward becoming the kind of first officer who won't stay silent next time. I won't, Aaron said with fierce intensity. I swear I won't. Never again. Good. Because the industry needs first officers who will speak up, who will question, who will advocate for safety even when it's uncomfortable. Yes, ma'am. Monroe's phone buzzed. She glanced at it briefly. The relief captain will be here in 20 minutes. Make sure you brief them thoroughly. I will. As Aaron returned to the aircraft, Monroe finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. 16 years of doing this job, and moments like this still took something out of her. Not because they were difficult professionally, she knew her authority, knew the regulations, knew she was right. But because they cost something emotionally. Because having to prove your expertise, your credentials, your right to be treated with basic professional respect, simply because of how you looked, that exhaustion was cumulative. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her husband, Nathan. Another day at the office. Tell you about it tonight. Love you. His reply came seconds later. Saw the news alerts. You okay? I'm fine. Just tired. You're kind of tired, or regular tired. She smiled, despite herself. After 15 years of marriage, he knew the difference. My kind. But I'm okay. Really. Proud of you. Always. Elena approached one more time. Dr. Monroe. I have a platform, 45,000 followers on social media, a streaming show about workplace justice. If you're ever willing to talk about your experiences, about what it's like doing this job, I'd love to have you as a guest. Monroe considered. After the investigation closes and the enforcement action is finalized, I'd be open to that conversation. Really. Really. Because this isn't just about one captain or one incident. This is about patterns, about who gets to hold authority and who has to prove they deserve it, about the assumptions we make based on surface characteristics. Those conversations matter. Thank you. Elena's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for showing me what real professionalism looks like. As the crowd gradually dispersed, passengers returning to their seats, officers filing their reports, gate staff managing the rebooking chaos. Dr. Elise Monroe stood alone on the jet bridge for just a moment. She'd stood her ground. She'd followed protocol. She'd given Captain Hoffman every opportunity to course correct. She'd established her authority clearly and professionally. She'd done everything right. And she'd still had to spend 15 minutes proving she deserved basic respect. Welcome to 16 years of this job, she thought. But then she thought about Elena's live stream, about the thousands of people who'd watched in real time, about the conversations that would happen in cockpits and flight schools and airline offices because of what was documented today. Maybe, just maybe, the next Dr. Elise Monroe wouldn't have to fight quite as hard. That was worth something. That was worth a lot. 20 minutes after Captain Hoffman was escorted away, the gate area at B-27 had transformed into something between a news scene and a community gathering. The energy had shifted from tense confrontation to something else, a mixture of relief, vindication, and the buzz that comes when people witness something genuinely significant. Elena Reyes sat in a corner, her laptop open, frantically editing clips from her live stream. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she crafted a Twitter thread that would within hours be read by hundreds of thousands of people. At ATL Gate B-27, a pilot refused an FAA inspector boarding. Here's what actually happened. The first tweet already had 800 retweets and climbing. Her live stream's peak viewership had hit 2,847 concurrent viewers, but the recording had been clipped, shared, and reposted across multiple platforms. The engagement metrics were staggering. And then Dr. Monroe pulls out her phone, voice calm as ice, and calls her supervisor. Invoke emergency enforcement protocols. Like something out of a movie. Y'all. She has a PhD from Caltech. She wrote the regulations he's supposed to follow. She designed the systems in his cockpit. And he refused her. When she listed her credentials, every degree, every investigation, every publication, you could hear his career ending in real time. The silence was deafening. Across the gate area, Luis Mendoza was on his phone with his Delta Union representative. Yeah, I witnessed the entire thing. If ALPA wants a formal statement for training purposes, I'm absolutely willing to provide one. This needs to be taught in every CRM class in the country. His union rep's voice came through tinny but clear. We're already getting calls about it. Someone from Flight Safety Foundation just reached out. They want to do a case study. Good, because what I saw today was a textbook example of everything we train against. Authority bias, failure to verify dismissing credible input from multiple sources. And it all stemmed from one thing. He looked at her and couldn't see past his assumptions. Near the windows, Colonel Whitfield was being interviewed by a local news crew that had rushed to the airport when the word viral video and FAA and discrimination started trending together. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and a keen sense for the story, beneath the story, held up a microphone. Colonel Whitfield, you intervened during the confrontation. Can you describe what you saw? Whitfield's military bearing was evident, even sitting in his wheelchair. Ma'am, I saw an exceptionally qualified federal inspector attempting to perform her lawfully mandated duties. I saw her present proper credentials, cite appropriate regulations, and offer multiple opportunities for verification. And I watched a pilot refuse all of it based on nothing but his own prejudgments. Do you think race was a factor? Whitfield didn't hesitate. I know it was a factor. I've seen federal IDs from every agency you can name over my 28 years in service. Those credentials were legitimate, and anyone with experience would have known it. But Captain Hoffman looked at Dr. Monroe and saw a black woman in a plain suit, and his brain couldn't reconcile that with federal authority, so he dismissed her. It's that simple and that ugly. What would you say to people who claim this is just about security procedures? I'd say they weren't there. Security concerns get verified. You make a call, you check a database, you follow protocol. Captain Hoffman did none of that. He just decided. And when multiple people, including another commercial pilot and the gate agent, told him her credentials were real, he still refused. That's not security. That's bias. The interview would air on the evening news and be viewed 340,000 times on YouTube within 24 hours. Victoria Hayes, the corporate VP, stood near the check-in desk typing rapidly on her tablet. She was drafting an internal memo for her own company's compliance team, using this incident as a real-time case study. Subject: Critical Incident Analysis. FAA Summit Air Executive Summary. Today, I witnessed a commercial airline captain refuse federal oversight, resulting in career termination and major regulatory action. Key lessons for compliance professionals. 1. When regulators present credentials, verify immediately. Don't delay. 2 multiple credible sources confirming legitimacy removes doubt. Defense. 3 public incidents create liability. Nightmares. 4 individual bias can trigger organizational crisis. Action items. Review our regulator interaction protocols. Ensure all staff know how to verify federal credentials. Schedule additional training on implicit bias in professional settings. She would send this memo to 47 corporate compliance officers across her network. 6 companies would update their protocols as a direct result. Jordan Taylor. The young black software engineer who'd spoken up about her own experiences was sitting with a man she'd just met, William Foster, the business executive who'd changed his mind mid-confrontation. They were having an unexpectedly deep conversation. I almost didn't say anything, Jordan admitted. I was scared. Scared of being the angry black woman. Scared of making a scene. Scared that speaking up would backfire somehow. William nodded, his expression troubled. I almost didn't speak up either. And my excuse is worse. I was scared of being wrong, of looking foolish. But you were scared of being erased, dismissed, labeled. That's a fundamental difference I'm only now starting to understand. What made you change your mind? Jordan asked, watching her. William gestured toward where Dr. Monroe was still speaking with gate staff. Watching how she stayed calm, how she kept giving him chances, how she laid out fact after fact, and he still refused. And I realized, I'm sitting here with a comfortable life, a secure job, privilege I never had to earn just by being born who I am. And this woman, who's more qualified than almost anyone in aviation safety, had to prove her existence for 15 minutes while I sat silent. He looked at Jordan directly. I'm ashamed it took that long. I'm ashamed I needed to be shown. And I'm grateful you found your voice when you did, because it helped me find mine. Jordan felt tears building. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for speaking up when I was still too afraid to. They exchanged contact information. Within 6 months, William would become a major donor to Jordan's organization, supporting young professionals of color in STEM fields. The connection formed at Gate B27 would grow into something meaningful and lasting. Brenda Holloway sat at her terminal, processing the rebooking for 127 passengers, while simultaneously dealing with a steady stream of gate agents, supervisors, and corporate personnel trying to understand what had happened. Her supervisor, a kind man named Thomas Rivera, stood beside her with a hand on her shoulder. Brenda, you did exactly right, he said quietly. You verified the credentials. You reported what the database showed. You stood up to a captain who outranked you. That took courage. Brenda wiped her eyes. I should have said more, should have insisted. You gave him the information. He chose to ignore it. That's not on you. But Dr. Monroe had to. Dr. Monroe had to handle a situation that never should have happened. Thomas agreed. But you were part of the solution, not the problem. Remember that. From the aircraft, Aaron Blake watched through the cockpit window as the relief captain, a woman in her mid-40s named Captain Rachel Santos, walked up the jet bridge. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd been flying for 20 years and had nothing left to prove. When she entered the cockpit, her first words were, "First Officer Blake." "Yes, ma'am." Aaron stood his posture unconsciously military straight. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" The question surprised him. Yes, ma'am." "You sure? Because witnessing something like that takes a toll." Aaron's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I should have spoken up. I should have told Captain Hoffman he was wrong. I just stood there and—" "Hey." Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. "You're not responsible for his choices, but you are responsible for yours going forward. You understand, yes, ma'am? I'm going to fly with you today." And I'm going to show you what good command actually looks like. Not because I'm better than Hoffman, technically, though. Between you and me, I probably am. But because I understand something he never learned. What's that, Captain? That authority isn't about making people smaller. It's about making the whole operation stronger. You ready to fly? Yes, Captain. Then let's go. As the relief crew prepared for departure, Dr. Monroe finished her preliminary interviews with witnesses. She'd collected contact information, recorded initial statements, and documented everything with the thoroughness that 16 years of experience had taught her. Elena approached one final time, hesitant but determined. Dr. Monroe, I know you're busy, but I just wanted to say what you did today matters. Not just for aviation, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere they earned the right to be. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. Monroe looked at this young woman journalist, live streamer, witness advocate, and saw something she recognized: the next generation of people who wouldn't stay silent. Elena, what you did matters too. Accountability requires witnesses. Documentation creates change. You used your platform for something important. Thank you. They hugged briefly, two women from different worlds connected by 15 minutes that would change both their trajectories. As Monroe finally gathered her briefcase and prepared to leave the gate, she paused near the window. Flight 5821 was still at the gate, but it would fly. With a different captain, under different circumstances, with everyone aboard knowing that the rules applied to everyone, even especially those in command. She pulled out her phone and saw a text from Regional Administrator Bradford. News is already spreading. CNN called. So did Washington Post. PR wants to know if you'll make a statement. Monroe typed back, after investigation closes. Not before. This isn't about publicity. It's about process. Bradford's reply. That's why you're the best we have. She smiled despite her exhaustion. Then she saw another text, this one from her daughter Naomi, who was a junior at Spelman College studying aerospace engineering. Mom, are you the Dr. Monroe from the viral video at Atlanta Airport? Yes, honey. Mom, you're everywhere. My whole timeline is talking about you. My professor just mentioned it in class. Are you okay? I'm fine. Just tired. I'll call you tonight. Mom, you're my hero, like literally my hero. I showed the video to my study group and we all cried. I'm so proud of you. Monroe had to stop walking and just breathe for a moment, because that text from her daughter, who'd grown up watching her mother navigate bias and discrimination and professional excellence, that text made everything worth it. I love you, sweetheart. Talk soon. As doctor, Elise Monroe walked through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, past travelers who didn't recognize her, past gate agents and pilots and security officers and cleaning crews. She was just another federal employee doing her job. But somewhere, too, 847 people had watched her stand her ground. Thousands more were watching the recording. News articles were being written. Training materials were being drafted. Conversations were happening in cockpits and living rooms and classrooms. One confrontation, 16 minutes long, was rippling outward in ways no one could fully measure yet. And Dr. Elise Monroe, lead Aviation Safety Inspector, Southern Regional Office, Federal Aviation Administration, walked toward her office to begin the work of documentation. Because accountability didn't end with a confrontation. It began there. Elena Reyes's Twitter thread exploded in the way only the rarest, most perfectly documented injustices ever do, exponentially, unstoppably, with the force of collective recognition that something significant had just been witnessed. Her thread hit a tipping point 7 minutes after posting, when an aviation safety account with 120,000 followers quoted her tweet with, "Everyone in aviation knows Dr. Elise Monroe. PhD from Caltech authored the CRM protocols we all train on investigated major incidents. This captain just refused one of the most respected experts in the field. His career is over." That quote tweet got 200 retweets in 12 minutes. Then a civil rights attorney with 250,000 followers shared it. Watch this. A black woman presents federal credentials, cites law, gets verification from multiple sources, and a white pilot still refuses her. Then watch what happens when she reveals who she really is. This is what bias looks like in real time. That went to 800-900 retweets in 20 minutes. Then a verified aviation journalist from Flight Global picked it up. The pilot's refusal to even verify her credentials after the gate agent confirmed them in the database tells you everything. This wasn't about security. Thread from Eyewitness is devastating. By minute 37, Dr. Elise Monroe was trending number 7 nationally. By minute 52, Gate B-27 was trending number 11. By minute 64, Summit Air scandal hit number 3 right below a celebrity divorce and a breaking international news story. The comments were a mixture of vindication, fury, education, and recognition. Captain Derek Hoffman. 27 years experience, 14 complaints in his file that were never acted on. Someone requested his records. This was coming for years. I flew with Hoffman in 2020. He called me sweetheart the entire flight and dismissed every suggestion I made. I'm a 5,000-hour ATP. I'll let you guess what I look like. This man should have been grounded years ago. Dr. Elise Monroe has investigated 19 incidents, published 23 papers, trained hundreds of inspectors. Her CV is 10 pages long. But to Captain Hoffman, she was just a black woman who couldn't possibly have authority. That's the industry we're still fighting in. Under law, obstructing an FAA inspector is a federal offense with penalties including certificate revocation and criminal charges. He didn't just lose his job, he committed a crime. On camera, with 2,800 witnesses. Reddit exploded. The flying subreddit had a thread with 200 comments in the first hour. The Justice Served subreddit had 27,400 upvotes in 90 minutes. The Aviation subreddit had 800 comments debating every angle. TikTok creators posted 47 different reaction videos or analysis threads within 90 minutes. YouTube aviation channels raced to get videos uploaded. LinkedIn professionals posted think pieces. Instagram infographics flooded feeds. Within 1 hour, newsrooms were scrambling. CNN breaking news alert came 47 minutes after the incident. FAA launches investigation after commercial pilot refuses inspector at Atlanta airport. Viral video shows confrontation. More details developing. NPR. Breaking came at 52 minutes. A confrontation at an Atlanta airport gate is raising questions about implicit bias and federal authority. A pilot refused to allow an FAA inspector on his aircraft despite proper credentials. The incident was live-streamed to thousands. The viral wildfire was spreading, jumping from platform to platform, conversation to conversation, city to city. But Dr. Monroe had already done her part. She'd documented it. She'd established the facts. She'd stood her ground. Now the system would do its work, and Captain Derek Hoffman would face the consequences he'd earned. Summit Air Corporate Headquarters, Dallas, Texas. Emergency conference room, 1:47 p.m. Central Time, 67 minutes after incident. CEO Linda Morrison stood at the head of the conference table, her expression grim as her executive team filed in with varying degrees of urgency and panic. The wall-mounted screens displayed multiple feeds CNN with the headline, "Pilot Refuses FAA Inspector," a live feed of their stock price down 5.1% now, and Elena Reyes's Twitter thread with its devastating timestamp record of events. "Close the door," Linda said. "David, where are we legally?" David Foster, General Counsel, set his phone down with deliberate care. "Legally, we're in a catastrophe. Captain Hoffman committed federal obstruction of an aviation safety inspector captured on video with nearly 3,000 live witnesses. The FAA has invoked emergency enforcement protocols. Our code-share agreements are being suspended. We're facing potential organizational liability, Because he glanced at Angela Rodriguez, the HR director, we had 14 prior complaints against this pilot that were never escalated. The room went silent. 14. Linda's voice was dangerously quiet. Angela opened her folder with trembling hands. Captain Derek Hoffman, hired 1998, promoted to captain 2006. First complaint filed 2018. Last complaint filed 3 months ago. None resulted in formal discipline. Read them, Linda commanded. Angela's voice shook as she read through the list. First Officer Martinez complained about being told to sit down and be quiet. Marked as communication style difference, no action. Gate Agent Simmons complained about inappropriate comments. Marked as misunderstanding, verbal counseling only. FAA. Inspector Chen filed a complaint about being unnecessarily hostile and non-cooperative. Marked as personality conflict, no discipline. The pattern was undeniable. All dismissed as personality conflicts or communication style differences. When she finished, Linda Morrison's face was white with fury. "Who signed off on these?" she asked quietly. Angela's voice was barely audible. "Former Chief Pilot Robert Davidson. He retired last year. Get him on the phone. Now." "Ma'am, I don't care what you think. Get him on the phone or I'll fly to his house personally and drag him back here." Sarah Kim. The CMO cleared her throat. "Linda, we have bigger immediate problems. Social media is asking why we employed a pilot with this history. News outlets are requesting his personnel file. Business travelers are posting that they'll never fly Summit again. Our brand reputation score has dropped 18 points in the last hour." James Wheeler, VP of Flight Operations, spoke up. "We need to suspend all of Hoffman's regular crew. Interview everyone who's flown with him. If there's a pattern of intimidation or discrimination, we need to know before the FAA discovers it in their audit." "Do it," Linda said. "We also need to address the other captains with similar complaint histories." Linda's head snapped toward him. "There are others." James looked sick. Under Davidson's tenure, 47 complaints were marked "no action needed." I've been reviewing them since the video broke. At least 8 other captains have patterns similar to Hoffman's. Not as severe, but concerning. 8. Linda wasn't asking. She was processing. We've been protecting 8 pilots who shouldn't be flying. Ma'am, don't defend it. Don't explain it. We failed. As an airline, as leaders, as human beings, we failed. She looked around the table. How many people knew about these complaints and did nothing? Silence. That's what I thought. Linda's voice hardened. Here's what's happening. David, draft a statement. We apologize unreservedly. We announce Hoffman's termination effective immediately. We reveal we're conducting an internal audit of all complaints filed in the last 5 years. We announce enhanced bias training, independent complaint review process, and zero-tolerance policy for inspector obstruction. That's admitting fault, David warned. Because we are at fault. Linda's hand slammed the table. A PhD expert from Caltech, the lead inspector who wrote our training protocols, was refused boarding by our captain after presenting valid credentials. And we missed 14 warnings that he was exactly the kind of pilot who'd do something like this. We are at fault. She stood pacing. But more than that, we're going to fix it. Sarah, I want a comprehensive plan for diversity in aviation programs. James, you're personally reviewing every active complaint and every captain's history. Angela, new HR protocols for complaint investigations, third-party review, no more in-house dismissals. Linda David interjected, if we do all this, we're opening ourselves to massive liability. Every complaint we dismissed becomes potential ammunition in lawsuits. Linda stopped pacing and looked at him directly. You know what's worse than liability? Being the airline that protected problematic pilots because we were too cowardly to face the truth. That's our legacy if we don't act now. She gestured to the screens showing the viral video, the news coverage, the social media firestorm. This incident is going to define Summit Air for years. The only question is whether we're defined as the airline that had a problem or the airline that had a problem and actually fixed it. She looked around the table at her executive team. I want recommendations on my desk in 2 hours. Full transparency, full accountability, full reform. And if anyone in this room thinks that's too extreme, you're welcome to submit your resignation now. No one moved. Good. Then get to work. We have an airline to save and a culture to rebuild. And we're going to start by calling Dr. Elise Monroe and asking not how we can minimize damage, but how we can actually make this right. As the team dispersed, Linda pulled out her phone and dialed FAA Administrator Teresa Ramirez directly. Teresa, this is Linda Morrison from Summit Air. I'm calling to apologize for what happened to Dr. Monroe and to pledge our complete cooperation with the investigation. Through the conference room windows, Dallas sprawled beneath a cloudless sky. Somewhere in that city, Derek Hoffman was sitting in his house career in ruins, still not fully grasping what he'd lost. Somewhere else, Aaron Blake was preparing to fly with a captain who'd show him what leadership actually looked like. And somewhere, Elena Reyes was still posting updates to her thread as the story continued to unfold. But in this room, at this moment, a major airline was being forced to confront an ugly truth they'd enabled discrimination for years by calling it personality conflicts and communication styles. And now, thanks to one woman who refused to be dismissed and one journalist who refused to look away, that truth was public. The cost would be enormous. But the alternative, continuing to protect pilots like Hoffman, would have been worse. Derek Hoffman's hands shook on the steering wheel as he pulled into his driveway in suburban Dallas. The drive from the airport had been 43 minutes of radio silence. He'd turned off every station after the third one mentioned the viral video of a Summit Air pilot refusing an FAA inspector. His phone, which he'd turned off during the drive, vibrated with accumulated messages the moment he powered it back on. 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, 19 voicemail notifications. He didn't check any of them. The house was empty. Jennifer, his wife of 26 years, had left a note on the kitchen counter. Staying at Claire's. Need space to think. Don't call. Not, I love you. Not, we'll get through this, just don't call. Hoffman set the note down with numb fingers and walked through the house that suddenly felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Wedding photos on the mantel. His framed captain's license on the office wall. Model airplanes arranged on shelves, a Boeing 747 he'd always dreamed of flying, a vintage DC-3 he'd bought at an aviation expo. The F-16 that reminded him of his childhood dreams. They looked like toys now, relics of someone else's ambitions. He made the mistake of sitting down at his computer. His personal email had 312 unread messages. The subject lines told the story. You're a disgrace. Racist pilot exposed. Forward this to Summit Air HR. Hope you lose everything. You deserve worse than losing your job. He closed the email without reading any. Then he made a bigger mistake. He opened Twitter. His name was trending. Captain Hoffman. Derek Hoffman. Summit Air pilot. The tweets scrolled past like an endless indictment. Derek Hoffman refused Dr. Elise Monroe, Ph.D., Boeing engineer, lead, FAA inspector. He saw a black woman and couldn't process authority. Someone requested Derek Hoffman's complaint history. 14 complaints, all from women, people of color, or people who questioned him. Pattern much. Derek Hoffman had 27 years to learn humility. He had 19 500 hours to learn respect. He had 1 moment to do the right thing. He failed all 3. He found a Reddit thread, the complete failure of Captain Derek Hoffman. His daughter Emily called. Georgia Tech. Aerospace engineering. His pride and joy. Dad. Emily, sweetheart. Dad, you're a case study in my class. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Hoffman felt his stomach drop. What Professor Chen, she's teaching human factors in aviation. She showed your video. Dr. Monroe's credentials, the whole thing. Then she asked us to analyze what you did wrong. Emily, I had to sit there while my classmates listed every mistake you made. Failure to verify credentials, authority bias, rejection of multiple credible inputs, pattern consistent with implicit racial prejudice. It wasn't about Dad. Emily's voice cracked. Dr. Monroe is in our textbook. Chapter 7. She wrote it. She's literally in the chapter about how authority gradients cause crashes. And you refused her. I made a judgment call. You made a racist judgment call. The words came out like bullets. And now I have to go to class every day knowing my father is the example of everything we're supposed to prevent. Emily, please. What were you thinking? What did you see when you looked at her that made you just decide she didn't belong? Hoffman couldn't answer, because the honest answer was too ugly to say to his daughter. That's what I thought, Emily said quietly. I need some time, Dad. Don't call me. She hung up. Hoffman sat in his dark office phone in his lap and stared at the walls covered with photos of his aviation career. First, solo. Commercial license ceremony. Captain upgrade. Pilot of the year 2015. Commendations. Certificates. 27 years of achievement. All meaningless now. His phone buzzed. Text from his union representative, Derek West, reviewed the video and witness statements. There's no defense here. You refused a federal inspector on camera after verification with multiple warnings. ALPA can't represent you on this. I'm sorry. Another text from his brother Mom's asking about you. She saw the news. What do I tell her Hoffman thought about his mother, 83 years old, who'd attended his first solo flight, who'd proudly told everyone her son was a captain? What do you tell an 83-year-old woman that her son was all over the internet for discrimination? Tell her I'm sorry, he texted back. For what, specifically? For not being the person she thought I was. No response. As night fell, Hoffman sat alone in his house and made a mental inventory of his losses. His career. Gone. His wife. Staying somewhere else. His daughter. Not speaking to him. His reputation. Destroyed. His union. Won't represent him. His mother's pride. Shattered. His self-image as a good pilot. Revealed as a lie. He stood and walked to the shelf where his Model 747 sat, the aircraft he'd always dreamed of commanding. He picked it up, this toy representation of ambitions that would never be fulfilled. The FAA letter would arrive in the mail tomorrow. He already knew what it would say. Certificate revoked. Not suspended, revoked. Meaning fundamentally unfit. Meaning 27 years erased. Meaning never again. He'd lost everything in 15 minutes because he'd looked at Dr. Elise Monroe and made a judgment based on her appearance rather than her credentials. And the worst part, the part that he was only beginning to understand, was that he'd been wrong. Not just procedurally wrong, but fundamentally wrong, Doctor. Monroe was more qualified than him in almost every way that mattered. PhD versus his bachelor's degree. Boeing engineer versus his operational experience, safety expert versus his line flying, published researcher versus his opinions. She'd earned her authority through expertise, dedication, and excellence. He'd assumed his authority through rank and refused to see anyone else's. That was the difference. And that difference had cost him everything. Derek Hoffman set down the model airplane and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring the official letter, the news interviews, the legal proceedings. But tonight there was just silence and the growing understanding that he'd destroyed his own life. Not because of Dr. Elise Monroe, but because of Derek Hoffman. 48 hours after the Gate B-27 incident, the institutional response was swift, comprehensive, and unprecedented. FAA Headquarters, Washington, D.C. FAA Administrator Teresa Ramirez stood behind a podium bearing the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration, facing a packed press briefing room. She'd been administrator for 3 years, but this was the most important statement she'd ever make. "Good morning. I'm here to address the incident that occurred 2 days ago at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport involving Summit Air, Captain Derek Hoffman, and FAA Lead Aviation Safety Inspector Dr. Elise Monroe." The room was silent except for camera shutters. First, let me be clear. Captain Hoffman's ATP certificate has been revoked, not suspended. This is an important distinction. A suspension suggests temporary removal pending corrective action. A revocation means the FAA has determined the pilot lacks the judgment, character, and compliance disposition required to hold this privilege. She paused, letting that sink in. We don't make this determination lightly. We made it based on Captain Hoffman's willful obstruction of a federal aviation safety inspector, his refusal to verify credentials through proper channels despite multiple opportunities, and his demonstrated inability to accept lawful authority when it contradicted his personal assumptions. A reporter raised her hand. Teresa nodded. Administrator Ramirez's critics say the FAA should have caught Captain Hoffman's pattern earlier. He had 14 complaints. Why wasn't action taken sooner? Teresa's expression hardened. That's an excellent and uncomfortable question. Captain Hoffman's complaints were filed with Summit Air, not directly with the FAA. However, we're now examining whether our oversight of how airlines handle internal complaints is sufficient. If airlines are dismissing legitimate safety concerns as personality conflicts, we need to know, and we need to address it. Another reporter. What about Dr. Monroe? How is she? Teresa's expression softened fractionally. Elise Monroe has served this agency with distinction for 16 years. She's conducted 437 inspections, investigated 19 major incidents, and authored protocols that have made aviation measurably safer. What happened to her was unacceptable. She went off script, her voice carrying real emotion. Dr. Monroe has a PhD from Caltech. She designed systems that Captain Hoffman relied on every time he flew. She wrote the training protocols he was required to study. She's testified before Congress. She's saved lives through her work. And she had to spend 15 minutes proving she deserved basic professional respect simply because a pilot couldn't see past his biases about who belongs in positions of authority. The room was riveted. I've spoken with Dr. Monroe personally. She's professional, she's resilient, and she's focused on her job. But I want to be clear to every aviation professional watching this agency will not tolerate obstruction of our inspectors. We will not accept excuses that it was just a misunderstanding. And we will not look the other way when bias, racial, gender, or otherwise interferes with federal safety oversight. What concrete actions is the FAA taking? Another reporter asked. We're launching Operation Clear Skies, a 90-day comprehensive audit of all Part 121 air carriers' inspector interaction protocols and complaint handling procedures. Any airline found to have inadequate compliance frameworks will face certificate action. She continued. Additionally, we're establishing new protocols, mandatory reporting of all inspector obstructions, enhanced training for recognizing bias in professional interactions, and an independent review board for inspector complaints. We're also creating a confidential reporting system so inspectors who face discrimination can report it without fear of retaliation. Will this change how the FAA trains inspectors? Yes. But more importantly, it'll change how airlines train their pilots. We're working with ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association, to make implicit bias awareness and inspector cooperation mandatory elements of annual recurrent training for all commercial pilots. As the press conference concluded, Teresa stepped away from the podium and placed a video call to Dr. Elise Monroe. Elise, Teresa said quietly, I meant every word I said out there. I know, Teresa. Thank you. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry any of our inspectors have to go through that. It's the job. But I appreciate the institutional support. It shouldn't be the job, Teresa said firmly. Your job is making aviation safer, not fighting to be recognized as someone with authority to do your job. Agreed. Which is why I'm glad you're taking it seriously. Is there anything else you need? Resources support time off? Monroe smiled slightly. I need to finish my investigation, and I need to know that what happened won't be forgotten the moment the news cycle moves on. It won't be. I promise you that. Meanwhile, CEO Linda Morrison appeared on Good Morning America via satellite from Summit's headquarters. Ms. Morrison, you've called this morning's statement the most important in Summit Air's history. Why Linda looked directly at the camera, no notes, no PR filter. Robin, we failed. Not just Captain Hoffman, our institution failed. We had 14 complaints filed against this pilot over 7 years. 14. Every single one involved dismissiveness toward authority, toward crew members, toward people who dared question his judgment. And every single one was dismissed as a personality conflict or communication style difference. You're saying Summit Air knew Captain Hoffman had problems. We didn't just know, we documented it. And then we did nothing. We prioritized protecting our operations over addressing a pattern of concerning behavior. That's on us. What's changed? Everything. As of this morning, Summit Air has implemented the following mandatory quarterly implicit bias training for all flight crew, not just one-time training. A completely independent third-party complaint review system. Complaints will no longer be handled solely by company management. Zero-tolerance policy for inspector obstruction with immediate removal from flight status. And we're partnering with Dr. Elise Monroe herself to develop enhanced protocols for respectful professional interaction. You're working with the inspector. Captain Hoffman refused? Yes, because she's the expert. And because we need to learn from someone who's faced these situations and handled them with extraordinary professionalism. We're also establishing a $1.5 million fund for diversity in aviation education programs. Some people are saying this is just damage control. Linda's expression was firm. If we were doing damage control, we'd minimize, deflect, and hide behind legal language. Instead, we're taking full responsibility, revealing the extent of our failure and committing to transparent, measurable change. Our stock is down because of this honesty. Our reputation is damaged because we're not hiding the truth. But that's the price of doing what's right. The interview went viral with 1.2 million views in 6 hours. The response was mixed. Some praised Summit's transparency, others called it too little too late. But financial analysts noted something interesting by the market. Close Summit's stock had recovered half its losses. Because accountability, it turned out, was worth something to investors after all. The ripple effects spread through aviation like a wave. The ALPA Safety Conference in Chicago announced a new module for annual recurrent training authority recognition and implicit bias. Every commercial pilot will complete this training starting next quarter. The video from Gate B-27 will be required viewing. The Flight Safety Foundation Symposium in Seattle declared, "The Hoffman incident has exposed a cultural problem we've ignored for too long. We're launching a study on inspector interactions across all carriers, with particular attention to how inspector gender and race affect cooperation rates." Within 1 week, 14 major flight training programs had updated their curricula. The video from Gate B-27 became required viewing in human factors classes. New simulator scenario. Inspector refused. Trainee captains are presented with an FAA inspector and must demonstrate proper verification procedures. One instructor at Flight Safety International told his class, "This video represents everything we train against. Authority that refuses to accept oversight. Ego that overrides judgment. Bias that prevents accepting information. Every mistake Captain Hoffman made, you will learn to avoid. Because the stakes are too high to let pride kill people." MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics added a new case study to their Human Factors in Aviation course, Gate B-27 Authority Bias and Safety Culture. Georgia Tech's Aerospace Engineering program invited Dr. Monroe to give a guest lecture. 340 students attended, standing room only. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University created a new scholarship, the Elise Monroe Excellence in Aviation Safety Award, for students demonstrating commitment to unbiased evidence-based safety practices. 6 months after the incident, the changes were measurable. Inspector obstruction incidents down 71%. Bias complaints in cockpit settings down 43%. First officer unsafe to report concerns down 34%. Airlines with updated inspector protocols, 100% of Part 121 carriers. Training programs using Gate B-27 case study, 237 schools and airlines. Pilots completing enhanced bias awareness training over 67,000. But beyond statistics, there was something harder to quantify but equally important, a cultural shift. Captains who'd spent careers believing authority meant being unchallengeable were learning that real authority meant being accountable. Crews who'd stayed silent were finding their voices, and inspectors like Dr. Monroe were being treated with the professional respect they'd always deserved. One incident, 16 minutes, thousands of ripple effects. Progress wasn't instant. Bias didn't evaporate overnight. But the conversation had changed. The expectations had shifted. And the industry was measurably safer because of it. Captain Derek Hoffman's failure had become aviation's lesson. And Dr. Elise Monroe's professionalism had become its standard. 1 year after Gate B-27, Dr. Elise Monroe walked down the jet bridge toward a Summit Air aircraft, her black leather briefcase in hand, her credentials visible on her lanyard. It was a routine inspection, one of many she'd conducted in her career, now number 438. But as she approached the cockpit, she realized this was no ordinary day. The captain who greeted her was a woman in her early 40s with warm eyes and a genuine smile. Dr. Monroe, Captain Lisa Chen. It's an absolute honor to have you aboard. I've been hoping to fly during one of your inspections. Monroe smiled. Captain Chen, thank you for the welcome. No, thank you. Your work, not just your research, but what you did at Gate B-27, it changed this industry, made it safer, made it more professional. So thank you for that. The first officer, a young Hispanic man, stood and extended his hand. First Officer Marco Rodriguez. Dr. Monroe. I wrote my senior thesis at Embry-Riddle on your authority gradient research. You're kind of legendary. Monroe felt heat in her cheeks. I'm just doing my job, and we're honored you're here to observe us doing ours, Captain Chen said. Coffee, please. As Marco went to get coffee, Captain Chen opened her tablet. I want to brief you on today's flight and make sure you have everything you need. We're Atlanta to Houston 2-hour flight, weather's good. We've allocated the jump seat for you, and I've let the crew know you're observing so they'll operate normally. That all sounds perfect. Is there anything specific you'd like to focus on during the observation? Just your standard procedures, crew coordination, decision-making communication. I'm looking for normal operations. You'll see exactly that. Captain Chen paused. Dr. Monroe, can I ask how are you doing? After everything that happened? Monroe considered the question. I'm fine. It was intense at the time, but I had institutional support. I knew I was right, and I believed the system would work. And it did. Did you ever doubt that? For about 5 minutes when Captain Hoffman refused my final offer to restart the interaction. In that moment, I thought, what if there are no consequences? What if this just gets dismissed as a misunderstanding? But then the system worked. Summit took action. The FAA took action. And the industry learned from it. Marco returned with coffee. As they went through the pre-flight briefing, Monroe observed the dynamic between the crew. Captain Chen asked for Marco's input on routing. Marco questioned a fuel calculation politely but firmly. Captain Chen thanked him for the catch. They briefed emergency procedures collaboratively, with both contributing. It was everything crew resource management was supposed to be. During the flight, Monroe made notes, positive notes, about communication clarity, about decision-making process, about the respectful way Captain Chen accepted input, and the confident way Marco provided it. This was what flying looked like when bias didn't poison the cockpit culture. After landing in Houston, Captain Chen turned to Monroe. "How did we do exceptional? Your crew coordination, your communication, your collaborative decision-making, all textbook excellent. This is exactly what we want to see in every cockpit." "That means everything coming from you," Captain Chen said. "Really?" As Monroe gathered her materials, she noticed a young black woman in pilot uniform waiting near the jet bridge. First Officer Stripes, looking nervous. Dr. Monroe, the young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm First Officer Alicia Robertson. I wanted to introduce myself." "First Officer Robertson, nice to meet you. I'm 26. I was hired by Delta 6 months ago, and I need you to know you're the reason I believed I could do this." Monroe's breath caught slightly. Alicia continued, her voice emotional. 5 years ago, when I was deciding whether to pursue aviation, everyone told me it wasn't for people like us, that it was too expensive, too competitive, too closed off. But then I saw your video. I saw how you stood your ground, how you stayed professional, how you didn't let anyone make you doubt who you were. She wiped her eyes. "And I thought if Dr. Monroe can face that and still do her job with excellence, then maybe I can become a pilot. So I applied to flight school, got my licenses, applied to airlines. And now I'm here, because you showed me it was possible." Monroe felt her own tears threatening. "Where are you based, Delta Atlanta Hub? How are your flights going?" "Terrifying. Amazing. I spoke up yesterday when I saw something concerning with a hydraulic gauge. My captain thanked me. Said, 'Good catch, glad you're watching.' That's how it's supposed to work. Because of what you did. Because you changed the culture." Monroe shook her head. "Not just me. Elena Reyes documented it. Luis Mendoza explained it. Colonel Whitfield vouched for it. Jordan Taylor personalized it. A whole community made this change happen. But you stood at the center of it. You took the hit and didn't break." Monroe pulled Alicia into a hug. "Fly safe. Speak up. Believe you belong because you earned it. And when some captain treats you like you don't deserve to be there, remember you have 16 years of me proving we do. Stand on that foundation." Alicia nodded, unable to speak. As she walked away to her own flight, Monroe watched her go. This was why she'd stood her ground at Gate B-27. Not for revenge against Captain Hoffman, not for vindication, but for this moment a young black woman in pilot uniform believing she could fly because someone had shown her the way. Later that evening, Elise sat on her back porch with her husband Nathan, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline in shades of orange and purple. "How was work?" Nathan asked the question as routine as breathing after 15 years of marriage. "Good. Routine inspection. Crew was excellent." And she smiled. "I met a young pilot today, Alicia. She told me I'm the reason she believed she could fly." Nathan reached over and squeezed her hand. "How did that feel? Like maybe it was all worth it. The 16 years of proving myself. The Gate B-27 confrontation, the media attention, the FAA investigation. All of it. Because now, there's a 26-year-old black woman flying for Delta who might not have pursued aviation if she hadn't seen that it was possible. You changed an industry, Elise. We're changing it," she corrected. Present tense. It's not done. There's still bias, still discrimination, still barriers. But we're moving forward. Slowly, but forward. Her phone buzzed. A text from Administrator Ramirez. Year-end safety statistics are in. Inspector cooperation incidents down 68% year-over-year. Bias complaints down 51%. First officer safety reports up 34%. Whatever we're doing, it's working. Thank you for being the catalyst. Elise showed Nathan the text. How do you feel about being the catalyst? He asked. She thought about it. Thought about Captain Hoffman, whose career ended because he couldn't see past his bias. Thought about Aaron Blake, who'd learned to find his voice. Thought about Elena Reyes still using her platform to document injustice. Thought about all the pilots who'd examined their own behavior and chosen to do better. And she thought about Alicia Robertson, 26 years old, believing she could fly. I feel tired, Elise admitted. Tired of having to be twice as good to be seen as half as qualified. Tired of every professional interaction carrying the weight of representation. Tired of being the FAA inspector from that video instead of just Dr. Elise Monroe doing her job. She paused, sipped her wine. But I also feel hopeful, because that young pilot today, she won't have to fight as hard as I did. The captains she flies with have watched that video. They've been trained on implicit bias. They know the consequences of discrimination, so her path is a little clearer, because mine was rough. That's legacy, Nathan said quietly. That's progress, Elise corrected. Legacy is what you leave behind when you're done. Progress is what you build while you're still working. And I'm not done. She looked at the photo on her phone one Elena had sent her months ago, a still frame from the live stream. Dr. Elise Monroe, standing on the jet bridge, calm and professional credentials in hand, facing down bias with quiet strength. You know what the best part is? Elise said, looking at Nathan. A year ago, Captain Hoffman's refusal was shocking. It went viral because people couldn't believe a pilot would do that. Now, a year later, it would be even more shocking because the industry wouldn't tolerate it. That's change. That's your impact. That's our impact. Mine, Elena's, Luis's, every person who spoke up, every airline that updated protocols, every pilot who examined their bias and chose to do better. Change isn't one person. It's 1,000 people making slightly better choices. Nathan raised his wine glass. To slightly better choices. Elise clinked her glass against his. To progress. Slow, frustrating, but real. As the sun set over Atlanta, Dr. Elise Monroe sat with the satisfaction of knowing that tomorrow she'd go back to work. She'd conduct inspections. She'd verify safety procedures. She'd make aviation a little safer. And somewhere, a young black woman in a pilot uniform would be flying passengers safely to their destinations, believing she deserved to be there. Because someone had shown her it was possible. That was worth everything. The story of Dr. Elise Monroe and Captain Derek Hoffman isn't really about one inspector and one pilot. It's about every time someone is dismissed before they speak. Every time credentials are questioned because they don't match expectations. Every time authority is assumed to belong to one type of person. Dr. Monroe didn't just stand her ground that day at Gate B-27. She stood for every federal employee who'd been disrespected for doing their job. Every expert whose knowledge was doubted because of their appearance. Every professional who'd had to prove themselves twice as much to receive half the recognition. And the witnesses. Elena Louise Colonel Whitfield, Victoria Jordan, William Brenda, they showed us that change doesn't happen when one person speaks. It happens when everyone stops pretending they don't see the injustice right in front of them. Captain Hoffman's story is tragic. A technically skilled pilot with nearly 20,000 hours destroyed by bias he refused to acknowledge. But even in tragedy, there's teaching. His mistake has prevented countless other pilots from making the same error. His failure has made aviation measurably safer. Aaron Blake learned that silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. His redemption reminds us it's never too late to find your voice and use it for what's right. 1 year later, Alicia Robertson is flying as a first officer at a major airline. She exists in that cockpit because Dr. Monroe stood firm, because witnesses spoke up, because an industry examined itself and chose to change. Progress is measured in moments like these, not in policies or procedures, but in lives changed, in barriers lowered, in doors held open for the next person. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told you don't belong somewhere, you earned your place. This story is for you. Stand your ground. Know your worth. Let your expertise speak louder than anyone's assumptions. And if you've ever witnessed injustice and wondered whether your voice matters, it does. Elena's phone. Luis's expertise. Colonel Whitfield's moral authority. Victoria's analysis. Jordan's courage. William's honest reckoning. Every voice mattered. Every witness contributed to change, because accountability isn't one moment. It's 1,000 moments, 1,000 choices, 1,000 voices saying not anymore. Not on my watch, not while I can speak up. Dr. Monroe is still flying, still inspecting, still making aviation safer. Somewhere right now she's conducting an observation, and the captain is greeting her with respect, checking her credentials properly, and welcoming her aboard. Because that's what happens now. Because the industry learned. And somewhere a young person who never thought they could become a pilot is watching Alicia's story, watching Dr. Monroe's example and believing that maybe, just maybe, they can too. That's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, though sometimes those are necessary, but through people who stand firm in their truth, refuse to be diminished, and show the next generation what's possible. One courageous stand at a time. One voice raised at a time. One witness speaking up at a time. That's progress. That's hope. That's how we build a better world. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about justice and accountability, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your engagement helps these stories of courage and change reach more people. And if you've ever witnessed injustice or had to stand up for what's right, share your story in the comments below. Together, our voices create change. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next time you see something wrong, you have a choice. Will you stay silent, or will you speak up? The world is waiting for your answer. The end.